Good morning and welcome, everyone. We are at 9 o'clock Mountain, 10 o'clock Central, and ready to begin our session. Happy to have you here. Serene is here, ready to enlighten us, give us some tools to use as we work in South Dakota and are culturally conscious of those that we are working with in our programs. Welcome, Serene.
Thank you, Billy. Thank you to James and everyone who helped me get set up. I'm really grateful to be here today, and just want to start off by greeting you all in my language. So, Chante Washte Nape Chusape. My name is Serene Tenok, and I am from the Ihangtuan Lakota Oyate and also Sichanglu Lakota Oyate. And my mother is from Yankton Sioux tribe, which is Ihangtuan, and my father is Sichanglu Lakota, which is known as the Rosebud Sioux tribe. I'm enrolled in my mother's tribe, but I always talk about both. With my greeting, I said I greet you all with a good heart and a good handshake. When we greet one another as relatives, I remember being a young child and we would go somewhere and every single person that we met was a relative of some sort. So they would say, "Nape choose up it, go shake hands. That's your relative." You know, they'd say, "That's your kunshi, your grandma," or "That's your cousin or your auntie." So kinship in our life ways is incredibly important. And in my opinion, having the kinship systems, as we call them, Tioshpae, which is a larger community, and also the Tiwahe, which is kind of the smaller family system. It's my belief if we didn't have those things, we would not have survived the things that our people have endured through colonization. So I feel incredibly blessed to be born Indigenous and specifically Nakota and Lakota, and to have been given some of the teachings that thankfully the generations before were able to hold on to. Wasn't until 1978 through the Indian Religious Freedom Act that we were able to legally practice our lifeways without the threat of being put in jail. So as you can see, multiple historical traumas and current oppressions that still exist can be really difficult for our people, including our Native youth. And some of the things that I'm going to talk about today really are focused on cultural teachings. I think that we have such a wealth of knowledge here in the Dakotas to be able to access different people to talk about our culture. And I think it's something that should be interwoven into our classrooms nearly daily, because our lifeways are not a religion. It's not, there isn't a dogma attached to it. It's a way of life. A spirituality, a way of being a human being, the best human being that we can be in our daily lives. And so it's a lot to pack in 45 minutes, but I will do my best to share, I think, just some key things that can help us to connect to our youth. And the first step is always, I think, connecting to ourselves before we can fully connect to other people in healthy ways. So I'll just start out a little bit by can you all see this second slide? I'm just making sure. I'm hoping so. If not, just let me know.
We can see it.
Okay, sorry, I just saw the chat box. Okay, so like I said, my name is Serene Tenok, and all those letters basically just mean that I am a mental health professional and a licensed addictions counselor. And I'm an Ina, which in Dakota and Lakota means mother, to 7 children. They are not all biologically mine, but I still have 7 children in my life that I consider to be a mother to and take that responsibility for. We always talk about where we come from. And so my dad's name is Jean Tenok and my mom's name is Diane Merrick. Above all else, when I'm introducing myself, I always talk about my roles in kinship. So being a sister, auntie, sibling, relative, and friend, to me comes before being a professional, because if I did not have those things in my life that kept me grounded and feeling loved and the ability to give love, I don't think that I would be in the profession that I'm in. I already told my tribes. So I am the Chief Behavioral Health Officer at South Dakota Urban Indian Health. We have 2 locations, one here in Sioux Falls, and we have one in Pierce, South Dakota as well. Also the co-founder and director at Generation Red Road Incorporated. So this is an Indigenous nonprofit that J. Carlos Rivera and myself started to really focus on Indigenous wellness and looking at different avenues of healing addiction and trauma and grief with culture. Been a therapist for 15 years. I've worked in all sorts of places and schools, inpatient settings, residential settings, and of course, community counseling agencies. My focus really is on treating psychological trauma and also connecting to spirit, because I think when I say connecting to spirit, I'm referring to not only our own individual spirits, but also to whatever we consider our higher power, whatever name you put. Some people simply say the universe, some say God, we say Wakantanka, something beyond just ourselves to give us hope. Okay. Oh, and then that picture, sorry, those are 4 of my kids. They are much older now. And so the one who's just a newborn baby in my arms is a wild and crazy Tasmanian devil, almost 3 years old. And so those are my little ones. Keep me going every day. So I want to start out some of the cultural teachings with something called the medicine wheel, which I'm sure many of you have heard of before. The medicine wheel is something that you could literally, I don't even have a time frame. You could go on and on and on every single aspect of the sacred hoop and everything that's encompassed within that sacred hoop. In our belief systems, we believe that anything is possible within that circle, because there really is no direct beginning or no ending. That even as we have people who are born into this earth, we have people leaving, and we say going back on the Milky Way, going back to the ancestors. And so we look at and we realize that everything truly is that circle of life that people talk about. And so it gives us hope that even when things feel stuck, there's always a way through and a pathway through. So the medicine wheel, Changleshka, is some of the basic things that you'll hear about the medicine wheel. And I really wanted to talk about this first because it's the basis for a lot of the other things that we're going to discuss. Is you look at the 4 directions. So they say 4 directions is Tate Dopa. So the 4 directions are the basic, the north, east, south, and west. But within each of those directions, there are different teachings. And you can see underneath each direction that there are different colors, which often represent different things. For example, in the Lakota way, red really represents Wichozani, which is our health. And so and it often refers to physical health in particular. And so that's just one quadrant, right, to all of these other powerful teachings. And the thing I wanted to highlight is that if you look, you can see that, childhood is in one of the quadrants on the lower right. And then we go to adolescence, and we go to adulthood, and then we go to old age. And each one of those developmental stages in our life is like a chapter in our life journey, in our path. And the things that we experience in those different chapters and parts of our lives deeply impact who we are moving forward. And what we know now about epigenetics is it not only impacts us as individuals, but if we have children within the proteins around our DNA can be altered in really difficult ways, but also in healing ways. And it's my belief that through connection to ourselves and our culture, our spirituality, whatever it is for each individual, that we have the ability to literally reprogram some of those proteins so that they can access different things within us that aren't just those automatic behaviors of things that maybe were handed down to us through our genetics and through our DNA. So if we're able to look at each of these developmental stages, and really again today we're really focusing on looking at the childhood. In the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Wakayeja, which is sacred little ones, and the role that they play in teaching us as adults. I think sometimes we forget that our children actually are our greatest teachers. They challenge us emotionally in ways that maybe some other age group doesn't. But they also can ground us in the sense of wonder and awe and slowing down. And as adults, we're go, 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 busy, busy, task. All those executive functioning skills in the frontal lobe, where have to do this, have to do this. We need those things, of course, to survive, but we can get overly focused and get in the mode. And I think if there's one thing that children can really bless us with, is the ability to be more mindful and present, to laugh and look at the small things around us, the blades of grass, or whatever it may be, so that we can learn to be present with not just ourselves, but what we call Unchi Maka, which is the Mother Earth. So beyond the teachings of the 4 quadrants, you'll see, I'll briefly just say what each of those are in terms of ourselves. So there's the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional parts of who we are. So within us, I always say that we are living medicine wheels. A lot of these teachings we think about as concepts. We think of them as things outside of ourselves that we want to strive for, which can be helpful. It can be helpful to learn them. But for me, integrating and recognizing that these teachings that we're receiving up here cognitively, we have to feel them in our spirits, we have to feel them in our bodies, and we have to recognize that we ourselves are living medicine wheels. Every single one of us is sacred and walking around with the capacity to access healing in any of these areas. And so there's the four parts of self, the 4 directions, but then I want to talk a little bit about the sacred 7th direction. Before we can get to that number 7, we have to get to 5 and 6, the 5th and 6th direction, which are Unchi Maka and the Father Sky. Grandmother Earth is very much a living entity. It is something, we know, literally living, the energy, the molecules, everything within the water, it's living just as we are. It's just in a different form. And the way that Unchi Maka nurtures us is through water, is through food, is through all of the things that we need to literally live. The ability for plants to nurture us and all of those things. And so our relationship with each direction is really powerful and can bring healing. So that's Unchi Maka. And then, the Father Sky, we look above us, and often when we look up, we think about our loved ones. We think about our ancestors. We think about the universe. That's how we look up, right? We look up and we see the never-ending universe and in the stars and the sky. And so the ability to both be grounded in our Mother Earth and feel that nurturing energy, but also to feel that expansive feeling and awe of being a human being in this great wide universe. And so that's the 5th and 6th, the Unchi Maka, the Mother Earth, and then also the Father Sky. But then the 7th, the sacred 7th direction, we call it, is right in the middle of that medicine wheel. If you were to draw just a circle right in the middle, that would be the sacred 7th direction. And that sacred 7th direction is within each of us. Each of us has that sacred 7th direction within us, but it's also everything outside of us. And so it shows that everything is interconnected. Every single thing is interconnected. They say it's a sacred direction because really to fully experience and connect to that, it's ever present. It's always there, that healing ability of that sacredness. But often we have to go through these different journeys in our life, different chapters, different difficulties, love and support, all of those different directions to sometimes access that. It's always there, but through the difficult things, we're able to then access that sacred 7th direction. And when you do feel that, you can feel it when looking into your baby's eyes, you can feel it looking into the sun. You can feel it in all these different ways, but I think once people often get to that elder stage, very often they can talk about moments in their life when they realized how sacred they really were and how they weren't maybe taking care of themselves and valuing themselves. So sacred seventh direction, we all have that within us. The Wakayeja, which is the sacred little ones, there's a woman named Delphine Redshirt. She's a doctor, and she said these few things, which I thought really encapsulated what a Wakayeja is to our Lakota people. So she says, innocence is born in us. As small infants, we come into the world. It is life's harsh lessons that harden us, so that no one is ever born bad. And the ages from birth to 3 are a very, very sacred time. We actually have ceremonies at the age of 3 for little ones, because we kind of view them as transitioning from that interaction of the spirit world to coming fully into their human experience. And so our Lakota people know that as long as there's a soft spot on top of the head, so when a baby's born, they have that soft spot up there. And I was always taught from a young age, even when I would be little tiny and I'd want to hold the baby, my mom or grandma or whoever it would be would teach me that you have to be very careful right here on top of the head. That's that direct communication to God, to Creator, Wakantaka, to the ancestors. They're very sacred. They can feel and experience things that we can't as older people. And so we really cherish our Wakayejas because they are that sacred. And really, they're the hope of our nation, especially with the family that they're born into. And what we know is that our children require great nurturance on every single level. So I like this is just something that I think about in the work that I do with people of all ages. As I work with youth, I work with adolescents, and I work with people who are even at end stages of their life at times. And one of the things that is so, it sounds cliche. I think in popular culture, there's a lot of jokes about the inner child. And I get it, it's funny and, different contexts, but actually the truth of it is for me, my truth in experiencing working with people for many years is that those different stages in our life are always a part of who we are. Which then means that, if we're saying that a child is sacred, then that part of us never leaves us. We are always sacred. So we're walking with that inner child, so to speak. And ever so often that inner child who maybe didn't understand something or was wounded might rise up within us, right? When we get really dysregulated or triggered within ourselves, very often that comes from some sort of imprint or disruption in attachment or something that may have happened. And the reason why I think it's really important for us as teachers and therapists and helpers or just human beings to think about that is if we don't stop and reflect and look at ourselves and maybe the things that maybe cycles that we're stuck in, or when we get really dysregulated, behaviors that come from that, then how are we really supposed to fully show up for our children, are those that we work with? So of course, like everything, it's a work in progress. It's not a linear path, right? Everything happens in a circle, but there's so much power, I think, in being able to access that part of ourselves. So in kind of looking at our well-being, one of the things that I like to talk about, and yes, I know holistic is spelled it's usually spelled HOLISTIC, but I purposely put holistic to look at, the whole part of who we are. And so this is just a brief reminder, and this is a tool that anyone can use. It's not just for Native people. It's really a powerful universal teaching that slowing down to look at yourself as a living sacred medicine wheel that encompasses all of these unique parts, the physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional part. And looking at yourself and saying, which part am I maybe ignoring? Which part do I need to give more attention to so I can be a better helper in the classroom or, whatever space that you're in. And Also in community, are you becoming a part of the unhealthy dynamics that you're seeking to change or help with? This is a part of the systemic part in looking at the Lakota teachings of Mitakuye Oyase, which is means everything is interdependent. You know, every single thing in the universe is interdependent, interacts with each other. And so sometimes if we are carrying heaviness or not taking care of ourselves, which is so easy to do, we can find ourselves becoming a part of the dynamics and difficult things that we're actually like that brought us into the field. The things that we wanted to help change can become far away because we can find ourselves wrapped up in that dynamic, whether it's in the community or within our workplace. So it's really important, again, to kind of pull back and look at like the why. Like, why did I enter into this line of work? How am I maybe not taking care of myself and becoming a part of the solution as opposed to falling into some of those dynamics? We don't have much time to go into the sacred tree of life teaching, but I'll just briefly mention this. So in our nonprofit, one of the main modes of teaching that we teach through is something called the Red Road approach. And the Red Road approach was developed by my father 40 years ago when he got sober when I was born. That's why my name is Serene, because he said he began to find serenity around the time that I was born. And so that's kind of my namesake. And so as a part of this, he was raised very traditionally. First language was Lakota. In addition, my mother's first language is Nakota. And so he wanted to incorporate these teachings that he knew through the songs, the ceremonies, what he was raised with by his grandparents, to be able to teach, to help other people to get sober. And so the Red Road approach, the Red Road, for those of you who don't know, in the Native way, you can go to any res or and talk to almost any Native person across the country and ask them about the Red Road. And they'll know that what you're really saying is talking about a path of sobriety. And for me, being that next generation, I like to have discussions about expanding what the Red Road means. And that, again, it's not something outside of us per se, it's something within us. And so how are we walking the Red Road? Natives will often say, I'm walking the Red Road, which means I'm intentionally sober. And in expanding that, I like to include mental wellness in there, spiritual wellness. All of that, to me, is a part of walking the Red Road, because we know that recovery, we're all recovering from something. All of us are recovering from something. And so if we're looking at just, oh, I'm sober, therefore I'm walking the Red Road, well, we know that one person can be sober, but still really being not well in other areas. And not saying that in a judgmental way where we all have to be perfect, but more in a way where, kind of challenging ourselves to say, how do I expand my sense of wellness, and how do I take better care of myself? So that's the Red Road approach. It's a curriculum my father developed. We teach this still and run groups here actually at Urban Indian Health and the Red Road approach. But so this sacred tree of life teaching is from that Red Road approach. So if you look at this, it's really trying to say, how do we see ourselves reflected in nature, and specifically within the tree? And there are so many powerful teachings about how trees require nourishment in their roots, how there's an intelligence of things that just come to be because there's an innate just kind of life intelligence that unfolds within the tree, right? And not only how they exist on their own, but how trees communicate and send electrical impulses and messages to each other when they might need more nurturance. And you think about how some of the youth that we work with don't have the tools, they don't have the brain development, they don't have maybe the nurturance that they may have needed. Their behavior is communicating something. It may not be in a desirable form for the person who's experiencing it, but it is certainly a message to someone to say, you know, help. How do I regulate? How do I work through this? I don't know what's happening within my body. And so you look at the root system, obviously we need the nurturants, we need all the elements on the outside as well to be able to grow. And again, there's so many other pieces to this, but with time, I'm not going to get too far into it. But the gist of it is that the heart, as in the human heart, is really in the trunk. The trunk is kind of that in between the roots and the unseen world, all the way up to the branches and the leaves, which are actually what we call like the mind or consciousness. The way that we think about ourselves and the way that people talk to us, all of those elements that come at us, just like the sun and the rain and the water, they can impact our mind, they can impact our brain. And so being really conscious of how are the things that I tell myself, the way that I talk to myself, the beliefs I have about myself, in my mind, how are those impacting the leaves or the fruit of the tree? And so just being aware too, as we work with youth, that the ways that we interact with them absolutely can have, we're one element, right, of many in their life. And maybe you can be that light to them, or that, you know, extra nurturance that maybe they aren't getting somewhere else, within, of course, the capacity of your role, right? So seeing ourselves reflected in nature, very powerful. So this is just a little bit more, it would be hard to talk about our culture and our life ways without talking about what we call the chanupa, which is a sacred pipe, which was brought to us by white buffalo calf woman, but was straight from the source of Wakantaka, which is, you know, the great mystery. And the sacred gift was brought to our people to help us live. And ultimately saying, if you follow these 7 sacred rites that are given to you from above, it's very sacred. And anything that you encounter, you will endure and you will get through. And so a lot of our elders say, you know, with the families that were torn apart, the boarding schools and the physical and sexual and emotional and spiritual abuses that we have been experiencing as a people for many, 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 many years and many generations, if we did not have our life ways, I don't know how we would be at this point. And so being able to have our spirituality and culture is very important. It's what has helped us to be resilient through all of the forced colonization and oppression. And so one other piece of this in terms of cultural teaching is that our compassion is not a vocation alone, but a way of life called wo lakota. And then I put Dakota and Lakota as well, because we have within, a lot of people just think, oh, all of the tribes are the same, and you know, they all speak the same language, but there are definitely differences even within Ocheti Shakoni here. And so my father's Lakota, my mother's Nakota. So my mother would say compassion is wa Nakota, but my father's wo Lakota. So basically that these talking about how daily relationships are vital to our spirit and energy, and the ways that our life teachings are I put spirit food. It's the eternal energy that sustains us in our physical journey here as human beings. So spirit food, for those of you who don't know, very often we put out a spirit plate for our loved ones and our ancestors and our helpers. So we might be preparing a special birthday meal or a gathering, or some people do this every day. You take a little piece of everything that you have made, including the water or the coffee, and you take a little portion of each of that. And then you pray with that food as a family or a community. And you're very intentional in putting that energy of thanks into that and connecting to your loved ones. And so then you very often take it out, put it out in nature, maybe by a tree or outside somewhere. And it's the act of continuing gratitude, but also the relationship with our loved ones who've passed on, because in our beliefs, that never ends. It never, ever ends. That love that you have experienced, the teachings, how they're imprinted in your heart and mind. It's our way of saying, we know you're still there. and we want to feed you, your spirit. They're physically not eating anymore, but our spirits can be fed. And so that's what spirit food is. But if we look at us as human being to human beings, we can really rejuvenate and fuel and feed one another's spirits through good words, kindness. Even it's not all, roses all the time, right? And so I even think of this concept as being compassionate with ourselves and others, even when there is conflict or difficulty, which is incredibly hard. And so being able to connect with and not just have a rupture or a conflict and then never connecting again, that's appropriate in some situations. However, sometimes the ability to say, hey, that this is a really hard time, but I see you and I'm going through it too. But how do we remain connected and talk through this? That can definitely be nurturance for our spirit. Okay, so I want to talk some about skill building and kind of have that basis for culture, the medicine wheel. We're all living medicine wheels. Everything around us is part of that sacred space, the seventh direction. And then looking at how we take care of ourselves and show up is incredibly important for youth, as I mentioned earlier. Now, looking at how we can help our youth who are really dysregulated at times to try to find, in the very least, some calming mechanisms for them so that they can be a little more effective in whatever environment that they're in. And so I'm a huge believer in nothing is going to happen overnight. I mean, there are some behavioral changes and things you can do that absolutely you'll see right away. I've seen it with my own kids at times where I may be totally missing a cue as a mother that they're, might be acting out in daycare or something. And I'm just so involved in all of this adulting, and it makes me shift my energy and slow down and think kind of holistically. And when I do that, I'm able to realize, wow, there have been some changes that to me as an adult are just a part of what needs to happen. But for this little one who doesn't have all the information I have or developmental abilities, for them, this is a really huge change or something that maybe they have anxiety about. So they may be hitting more or, something like that. But it's an opportunity for us to model for our kids, even when they themselves can't regulate, like, because we all experience frustration at times. We all experience feelings of helplessness or get triggered. And by no means do we have to be perfect, but being able to demonstrate and maybe even naming a little bit, like if you go to the third bullet point down, helping you to identify what they're feeling, talk about what may have brought that feeling up for them, and then learning new skills to calm themselves when that feeling is there. And really talking about how emotions there's no bad emotion, right? And I'm assuming everyone probably already does this, but sometimes revisiting it with some youth can be very helpful, or sometimes we have to talk about this several times in different ways to really integrate that concept into their being. And so, letting them know that even sometimes, like if you're feeling maybe frustrated or confused or you don't know something, being kind of transparent about that and saying, this is really hard for me too, and of course, not making it about us, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to talk about all these things that are going on for me, but being able to use ourselves as a model that we are all human. Even as adults, we struggle. And here's some things that sometimes help me when I'm angry, or what helps you, maybe when you're at home or in the classroom to kind of calm yourself. And so integrating culture when possible, making it a frequent experience for all of our youth and staff, supporting identity development promotes resilience. So very often as a person of color, we are brought into situations to talk about culture, and it might be around the time of Thanksgiving where someone might want your opinion, or just different times where they might say, oh, okay, yeah, we need an hour of cultural congruence training for our staff. Can you come in and do that 45 minutes, right? which, okay, that's great. It's a start. But I think for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to be able to say, this should not be just something we think about or leave it to just Indigenous people to think about. It has to be a community-wide effort where we're being really conscious about how do we integrate culture into the classroom setting all the time, because it promotes identity development and strength and feeling proud for those Native youth that we know their graduation rates have been dwindling. And I can say this from experience that when my children come home and they say, my teacher showed us a video today of a woman jingle dress dancing and talked about, our tribe and things. They come home and they're excited and they feel seen and they are able to be seen by their classmates. That just promotes that sense of resiliency and connection. And I recognize that people often say, like, where do I start? Like, how do I do this? And there's a lot of ways. I think that there's definitely resources online and teaching tools. And there are people in the community that maybe even coming in and sharing a song or, storytelling time or something like that, so that our non-native youth can really experience that. There's a lot of really cool things about this culture, and there's a lot of good things, because as a professional, I can't tell you how many times I have had different people come to me and a real question, like, why are Native people like alcoholics? Or they'll say things which are microaggressions and an unconscious thing, not trying to be mean, but wow, I don't know many successful Native people, saying things like this. And it's very much it can impact the spirit and the mind of Native people, and especially our youth. And so I feel like it's incredibly important, especially within our programming that we have in our communities, to be able to integrate and talk about some of these things that are, a concept, but making it age appropriate and engaging. So in the occult way, emotions are seen as a language of our spirit. It's our way of seeking to connect and express ourselves. So I love that, because a lot of people growing up were shamed if they had emotions, if they had big emotions. And I think the tendency is to want to silence it right away, or to make it go from 10 to 0. But what we know is that regulation is a consistent thing that we have to do before. It might go from a 10 to an 8 for the first couple of weeks. It might go from, or there might be a spike and then back down. But the goal is not to eradicate the behavior per se. The goal is to connect. And the goal is to find ways to help them to express themselves at times. And I understand that, again, the capacities to do this, especially if you're a teacher, an after school provider, or whatever it may be, that isn't within the scope of your role. And I completely understand that. But if there's someone who's really struggling, pulling in those outside resources like the counselors, or maybe helping them set up for counseling. But I just want to share a little example of my son has very big emotions. He's 6 years old. He's in first grade, and I have had to travel for work recently, and a few weeks in a row, just a couple days each week, but it really threw my kids off. And again, to me as an adult, I'm like, oh, they're fine. They're with their dad. They're with it. But for them, it was a big shift. And so I had gotten a call from one of the teachers and said, I've just been noticing a lot of, talking back and not wanting to do things and more grumpy. And so she had asked him, like, finally, what's going on? You're not yourself. And he started to cry and said, I just miss my mom. And then she was then able to say, would you like to FaceTime your mom today? And so then she messaged me, and we had a couple short little 2-3 minute FaceTimes throughout the day. And she kind of made that special effort, instead of him going out to recess, to be able to stay in with her and FaceTime me. And so it really like helped him, I think, to feel like, gosh, there's this connection between home and school. And I recognize some of our youth don't have that, but there are so many other ways to just, I guess, help them to be seen. And the first step is to say, hey, I'm noticing something, is not right. And then slowly trying to find ways to help regulate them in different scenarios. So the last thing that I'll talk about is in the line of work that everyone does. If you're working with people and especially kids, we have to continue that self-assessment. And so we believe that spirit is energy and energy is spirit. They're one and the same. And how we show up and bring ourselves every day that we walk through the doors of wherever we're going into, it's about being as intentional as you can. And sometimes there's something called compassion fatigue, which I'm sure most of you have either experienced or have heard of. And it's an area that I really like to focus on because I have had to work incredibly hard in the profession I'm in to pull myself out of places of vicarious trauma, where I was actually experiencing flashbacks and symptoms of people that I was working with, something I wasn't taught about in graduate school. It's been a hard but really rewarding road. And the only way I think I've been able to stay on this path is for those moments of self-assessment and remembering the why, not just what I do every day that I come to work, but the why. So again, we don't have time to do this, but in some of the workshops I do, we kind of talk about what called or led you to do this work. Did you witness others around you helping? And I love this question because everyone usually has a story about their grandmother or a teacher that changed their life or something, right? Like cultivating and accessing those memories of what brought you to the work that that you're in can be really helpful. And did others see this gift in you from a young age? I put this in there because I think almost every story that I've ever heard from someone who says, looking back, I didn't think I had that, or people didn't see it in me, but actually I was really resilient and fierce in these ways. And being able to recognize that one of us, all of us have gifts, all of us have gifts. And very often we can see them from a young age. People can reflect to us that we see them. And even more importantly is to be able to recognize those things within the youth that we work with, not necessarily directly naming it, maybe saying, wow, you're doing really great in this way, or your effort has brought you to this stage, but more the sense of being able to actually see and sense and feel that gift, because again, the energy, our youth can feel that. And we already talked about being a living medicine wheel and those parts of us. And again, in workshops, we would talk about the strategies and share those strategies and things that help us to maintain wellness. But given the time, I'm seeing that it is about time, I think, to open it up for maybe some questions or reflections, just to have conversation. So here's some contact information for me for both my Urban Indian Health, where it's my full-time job, and then my nonprofit, which I do on the side. So I'm not sure how, if anyone has any specific questions, you can certainly put it into the chat box, or I think you have the ability to unmute. It would be great to have actual verbal engagement if people are willing to do that. So feel free to, if you have any questions or reflections this far.
Absolutely. Everyone should have the power to unmute. I would just like to say what resonated with me was your acknowledgement or the realization that your son was having struggles while you're traveling. I think sometimes we forget when we are working in a field that we should be tuned into that, and we're maybe more tuned in when it's somebody else's family reactive than our own. And so that was a good reminder to me to accept our family's reactiveness.
Yes, that has been a theme for me lately. So thank you for naming that, Billy.
Hi, Serene. This is Laura Dimmick.
Laura, hi.
I just am so amazed by you. I feel like a proud auntie. As if I could be so presumptuous to say that, but I'll just say for the group that Serene used to work at our after-school program BSA in Vermilion when she was in undergrad, probably.
Mhm.
And I'm just thrilled to see you. It was just wonderful to listen to you. You have such a calming presence. And I have a lot of fond memories of you when you used to work at BSA.
Oh man, that was so fun. I think that was maybe one of my, well, no, I worked at Dairy Queen before that, but in terms of like working with people, I just remember a few that I got really close to that I really, really loved. So Laura, it's so good to hear your voice.
Yay, you too, sweetie.
Anyone else have any thoughts or reflections, questions?
Hi, I'll speak briefly. My name's Rayanne Metler. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I am in my car, so I apologize. I'm safely at a parking lot, but so I have a unique intersection of roles. I have an after-school program in the Black Hills called Black Hills Brick Spots and Beakers. It's a STEAM-focused camp, but I also, my full-time 9-to-5 job is working for Missouri Breaks Research, which does a number of research studies for the American Indian communities in the Dakotas. And so I just started this second role this past 6 months, and I've been tasked to, improve and increase engagement with youth, the American Indian youth. And, obviously the past couple years, this has been tough with COVID. And so I just had like the simple question of, it's actually a question I'm considering too. What does the word resilience mean to individuals, to communities, to adults versus youth? And I don't know if there's a answer necessarily that I'm looking for. I'm just saying, how can we explore that word with youth, especially in this context, in this meeting, but as individuals as well, whether individuals are from American Indian communities or not, right? So just to really explore this word and to promote doing that in group settings, no matter what that group might be. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. If you know me, like those sorts of questions are like my reason for living. So like we could have a lot of conversations on that. And I like that too, because I mean, right, we have the actual definition of resilience. But as we do as human beings, we have our subjective experiences, which then inform how we interpret that and then project that onto other people. And so I have I think probably a very different definition of resilience because of my line of work and everything that I've seen, that resilience to me exists on a spectrum of, maybe someone who's been deeply depressed or has lost a parent or a child, being able to get out of bed and take a shower, right? Like that is resiliency in that moment. So and then for other people, resiliency is being able to, seek counseling or do things after a difficult event and being able to get back on track, get their grades back on track. I think it's a very much an individualized experience and very much not just subjective. Actually, it's a community response, I think, in resiliency, where we have people around us who can say, not just you're amazing, you're great, you can do it, but again, just being present and being connected to one another, to me is like the ultimate resiliency. Because when people start to fade away in isolation and maybe substance use or whatever, maybe it gets harder to access that resiliency within them. But I don't have any answers, but I love the questions too. So.
Love it. Thank you so much for considering that.
Yes, thank you for the question. Oh, hi, Heather. I just saw your chat. Let's see. Is there anything else in here? I'm not sure if we have a few more minutes left, if there's anyone else who's got reflections on, you know, their work and maybe working with Native youth or just youth in general that they found beneficial or helpful. One thing that I can mention as I'm sitting here is art therapy is one of I went to school, graduate school for art therapy. So that's actually what my training is in. And I think it's a really great tool to be able to help people find voice. And I actually had a boy in here yesterday that I see who's 10, and his mom was in there and kind of really wants him to use his voice to stand up for himself. And he said, "What does it mean to use your voice?" And it was, again, Rand, it was one of those questions. It was like, let's do this. Let's talk about this and what it means to use your voice. Like, again, I don't have the answers, but let's explore this together, because mom's idea of using your voice is very different than your idea of using your voice, and maybe even my idea. And ultimately, it's about him understanding what that means to him and if that's even a priority for him, you know? And so what we ultimately decided on is that and discovered is that mom very much struggled to find a voice because she wasn't allowed to have one. And I guess kind of really wants her son to have that. But in actuality, like, he feels safe using his voice, but he doesn't necessarily want to at times. And so we talked about how having voice can at times being silent, right? It's your choice depending upon where you're at. It might be, I just feel like I need to like kind of process this. Finding voice literally means finding it, right? It's not just like being able to articulate it all in this really great way and talking loudly. It can be through a traditional song, it can be through a prayer, it can be through a sketchbook, you know, being able to express ourselves in some way, I think is this idea of kind of finding voice. And so art therapy can be a really powerful tool, which I'm sure many people already incorporate, but it's great for building community. And it's also great for just individuals. And by art, I mean, you know, music and all of it can be really helpful. Well, if no one has any other questions, I mean, we can wrap up a few minutes early. Oh, there was a question. Can you suggest some ideas we might consider to develop a more welcoming environment? Yeah, I guess that, again, that's really important. It all kind of depends on the environment and who. I'm not sure if, is it Burgard? Would you feel okay just kind of talking a little bit more about that or expanding on what kind of environments it is and maybe how you see the need for it to be more welcoming? I'm not sure if if I don't know if I'm saying your name right, Burgard, but the look of the room and artwork. Yeah, so I'll just give like I think the aesthetic and the environment that you create, it very much impacts the feel of the room and how you respond. And even if you have like, you know, certain areas where people can calm down, and know a lot of teachers have that. But I think if there are And of course, I'm speaking from a Native perspective, right? I know including all all cultures of people who might exist within that space is really imperative. But I think being able to include Indigenous artwork and to include storytelling, you know, maybe recordings of storytelling, being able to have that aesthetic in the room. I know for us at Urban Indie Health, we about a year ago went and got all new artwork for our whole clinic from all Native artists to be able to hang up more, I guess, culturally representative things, so that when our people come in, that they can see that reflected in our patient rooms on the medical side, but also in our behavioral health area. And so, and I don't know like the school's policies per se, but I think even having like, you know, maybe the school counselor or someone, the Native American Connections teacher, someone who has access to Sage, just so kids know, like, you know, like I have this little tiny, I don't know if you all can see it, but it's just like a little smudge shell for cedar, and I have this sitting out so that if any of the families I work with, or you know, youth or whoever wants to smudge upon entering, or maybe they had a really difficult session and we're feeling very emotional, we often talk about being able to, you know, to smudge to help cleanse some of that, you know, as you're releasing it, kind of cleansing. So things like that are even really important. Like some of the medicines can be helpful. But I think in at least having books, there's a really good Native artist named Jessie, I'll type it, Jessie Raincounter Taken Alive. She is a Hunkpapa, and she has a number of children's books that we just love. We have them at our house, and she has, you can find her books on Amazon, and a lot of schools in South Dakota have like mass ordered these books because they're books about, you know, long hair, like boys having long hair, for example, about, you know, like the spirit within us. And I mean, she just has really, really positive messages in ways that I think children really like within these books. So those are just some, off the top of my head, some examples of things that could be helpful. Okay, well, I appreciate all of you coming in for this hour and spending it with me. And even though I didn't get to see all of your faces or anything, I just I appreciate being able to talk on some of these things with the little bit that I do know and the things I feel passionate about. And I just want to send words of encouragement to all of you to keep on doing the good work you're doing.
Thank you, Serene. Your passion just glows through the screen. So I hope there's a day that we can all be in the same room sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, everyone, you have a little break. Do what you need to do and then come back for our closing session.